Emily Cordero was the kind of person who never made enemies, until the night she vanished without a trace. Daniel Pike, her quiet ex from college, claimed he hadn't seen her in years. Ava Griggs, the estranged daughter of a dead man, insisted she had nothing to hide. But when Emily's body was discovered, wrapped in plastic and dumped in a suburban garage, their names became the center of a chilling investigation that would unravel a web of lies, 2 mysterious deaths, and a secret buried beneath layers of deception. The morning started like any other on Maplewood Lane. Birds chirped over neatly trimmed hedges, sprinklers hissed across manicured lawns, and neighbors greeted each other with sleepy nods and coffee in hand. Brookside Hollow was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen until something did. The house at number 47 had been quiet for some time. Its owner, Harold Griggs, a retired postal worker in his 70s, had recently passed away from a stroke. With no immediate family, living nearby, his home stood untouched for over a week. A local real estate agent was sent to begin the process of listing the property for sale. As she unlocked the front door, everything seemed in order. A layer of dust covered most surfaces, and the smell of closed-up air clung to the furniture. It wasn't until she made her way to the garage that she sensed something wasn't right. The moment she opened the side door leading into the garage, she was hit with a wall of foul odor. It was strong, sickly sweet, and unmistakable. Something was rotting. At first, she thought it might be old food, maybe garbage forgotten in the heat. But as she stepped inside, past boxes of holiday decorations and old lawn tools, she saw the tarp. It was shoved behind an old chest freezer, half covered with flattened cardboard boxes. The fabric was soaked through with something dark, and flies buzzed around the edges. Her stomach dropped. She backed out of the garage, locked the door behind her, and called the police. Officers from the local precinct arrived within the hour, followed quickly by detectives and a forensic team. The smell had already spread beyond the walls of the garage. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering and speculating. What had been found? A raccoon? A pet? But as word began to spread that a body had been discovered, the neighborhood changed. The easy smiles and calm routines vanished. People locked their doors and closed their blinds. Crime scene tape stretched across the driveway. Police officers took photos and gathered evidence as the sun rose higher in the sky. Inside the garage, investigators uncovered the body of a young woman wrapped in thick, industrial-grade plastic and bound tightly with electrical cords. The plastic had been sealed with duct tape, layered again and again as if to hide something shameful. The body was partially decomposed, with visible signs of bloating. Judging by the condition, the medical examiner on scene estimated she had been dead for at least 2 weeks. Harold Griggs had no known visitors in his final days. There were no signs of forced entry into the house, and nothing inside suggested a struggle or crime. Yet here, in the garage of a man who had lived a quiet, solitary life, was the body of a stranger. No ID, no personal belongings, no immediate explanation. As the forensics team began documenting the scene, the questions multiplied. Who was she? How did she end up in that garage? And why had no one reported anything suspicious until now? The calm of Brookside Hollow had been shattered, and the nightmare was only beginning. The body found in the garage was that of a woman likely in her 20s, but without any form of identification, investigators had little to go on. Her clothes were plain: black jeans, a grey hoodie, worn sneakers, nothing that pointed to a particular lifestyle or background. Her face was bloated from decomposition, and there were no unique tattoos, scars, or birthmarks that stood out. Fingerprints were taken, but the initial search yielded no matches in the national database. She wasn't in any criminal system, hadn't applied for any government licenses recently, and wasn't flagged as missing, at least not under her own name. For now, she was simply a Jane Doe. The autopsy offered some early clues, but no immediate answers. There were no bullet wounds, no knife marks, and no broken bones. Toxicology results showed the presence of a powerful sedative, zolpidem, in her system, a drug commonly prescribed for sleep, but the most crucial detail was hidden in her lungs. Water. She hadn't been dumped post-mortem. She had been alive. When she was submerged, The cause of death was drowning, though where and how that had occurred remained unclear. The garage had no water source deep enough to drown in, and there were no signs the body had been wet when found. It became clear that the garage was not the scene of the murder. It was a dumping site. Meanwhile, investigators combed through recent missing persons reports across the county and surrounding areas, hoping to match the woman's physical description with someone who had vanished within the last few weeks. Eventually, a promising lead emerged. In the neighboring city of Havencrest, a 27-year-old woman named Emily Cordero had been reported missing just over 3 weeks earlier. Her roommate had told police that Emily never came home from work one evening and hadn't answered her phone. Since, the case had gone cold after a few days, as there were no signs of foul play and no leads to pursue. Photos of Emily were sent to the coroner's office, and while the decomposition made visual identification difficult, dental records later confirmed the match. Emily Cordero had been found. Now, her missing persons case was officially a homicide investigation. Emily had worked as a veterinary nurse at a small animal clinic. Her co-workers described her as responsible, kind, and soft-spoken. She had no known enemies, no history of drug use or mental illness, and no connections to the house where her body had been found. Her social media accounts were inactive in the days leading up to her disappearance, and her last known location, according to phone data, was her apartment. The puzzle only deepened as investigators looked into her background. There were no recent breakups, no workplace conflicts, and no financial troubles. She lived modestly and stayed out of drama. If someone had wanted her dead, there was no obvious reason why. But then her phone records revealed a series of late-night calls and texts in the weeks before she vanished. Many were to and from a number registered to a prepaid burner phone, one that couldn't be traced to a name or address. The content of the messages was mostly erased, but a few fragments remained on her cloud backup. Phrases like, "Don't tell anyone," "You promised, and this ends badly if you talk." It was the first sign that Emily had been keeping something secret. Something or someone she hadn't told anyone about. The pieces were beginning to shift, and what looked like a random killing was starting to resemble something much darker. Emily Cordero's life, once thought to be simple and routine, was beginning to look far more complicated. As investigators followed the thread of her encrypted phone conversations, they uncovered the first major clue. The burner phone had been used regularly for nearly 4 months before her disappearance. The calls always happened late at night and lasted between 5 and 15 minutes. Sometimes they occurred multiple times in one evening. The number never contacted anyone else. It existed solely for communication with Emily. Whoever was on the other end had gone to great lengths to remain hidden. Investigators issued a subpoena for nearby cell tower data, tracking the burner's signal to a general area in the industrial edge of Havencrest. Surveillance cameras in the vicinity led them to a white SUV that passed through the area during the relevant times. The SUV's license plate, captured by a traffic camera, was registered to a man named Daniel Pike, a 38-year-old construction foreman. Daniel had no criminal record and no apparent ties to Emily, but the more detectives looked into his life, the more troubling things began to appear. Daniel lived alone in a small rental home on the outskirts of town. He had worked on several renovation projects in the area, including one on Maplewood Lane, the very street where Harold Griggs' house stood. He had been part of a team that installed new flooring in Harold's kitchen 8 months prior. When questioned, Daniel claimed he barely knew Emily and insisted their only interaction had been a casual conversation when she stopped by one of his work sites. He said she had once asked for help jump-starting her car, and that was the extent of it. But when police obtained a search warrant for his home, that story quickly unraveled. Inside Daniel's backyard shed, investigators found electrical cords nearly identical to those used to bind Emily's body. They also recovered a half-empty roll of the same duct tape. More disturbingly, a black hoodie with faint traces of blood was discovered in a trash bag under the porch. The blood matched Emily's DNA. Though Daniel denied knowing anything about her death, forensic evidence was stacking up against him. A deeper dive into his digital footprint showed more troubling signs. He had searched for topics like how to erase text permanently, how long before a body decomposes, and sedatives that don't show up on drug tests. These searches had occurred just days before Emily was reported missing. As investigators examined Daniel's background further, they discovered something else unsettling. He had attended the same university as Emily, and during that time they had briefly dated. It was never serious. According to friends, it ended without incident, but the timeline suggested that Daniel's interest in her had resurfaced recently, and it hadn't been mutual. The real turning point came when digital forensic experts pulled fragments of deleted messages from Emily's cloud backup. One message read, "You lied about everything, I'm going to tell the truth." Another, time-stamped 2 nights before she vanished, simply said, "Meet me. One last time." It became increasingly clear that Emily had been entangled in a situation far more dangerous than anyone had realized. Daniel Pike, once a forgettable part of her past, was now the prime suspect in her murder, but police were beginning to suspect he wasn't acting alone. As investigators tightened their focus on Daniel Pike, the pieces of Emily Cordero's final days began falling into place. But one disturbing question lingered. Why had she drowned when her body was found far from any water source? That mystery deepened when a cold case resurfaced. A second young woman had died just 6 months earlier, under similarly strange circumstances. Her name was Lacey Brent. Like Emily, she had been in her 20s, with no known enemies or criminal connections. Her body had been recovered from a local lake, and her death had been ruled accidental. But with Emily's autopsy confirming the presence of zolpidem and signs of drowning, investigators decided to re-examine Lacey's case. Lacey and Emily had attended the same university and were in the same graduating class. Though they hadn't appeared particularly close, several mutual friends confirmed they had known each other. One friend even recalled an awkward exchange between the two at a campus event years earlier, involving a man who, at the time, no one had thought twice about: Daniel Pike. He had been involved with both women during college, though the relationships were brief. Back then, Daniel had seemed quiet and unremarkable, certainly not someone anyone would have suspected of hiding something sinister. Forensic analysts dug deeper into Lacey Brent's autopsy report. A second toxicology screen was ordered using more advanced techniques than were available at the time of her death. The results confirmed it. She had been drugged with zolpidem, just like Emily. What had been dismissed as an accidental drowning was now reclassified as a potential homicide. The similarities between the two deaths were undeniable. Both women had dated Daniel Pike, both had disappeared suddenly, both had been drugged, and both had died by drowning. The discovery of this connection shifted the investigation into overdrive. Detectives now had strong reason to believe that Emily had uncovered the truth about what happened to Lacey. It was possible that Emily had begun asking questions, or even threatening to go to the police. Perhaps that was what she meant in the text message that said, "I'm going to tell the truth." If Daniel had killed once, he might have been willing to kill again to cover it up. But one detail didn't fit. Emily's body hadn't been dumped in the lake. It had been transported to Harold Griggs' garage, an unusual and risky move. Why would Daniel choose a location so close to where he had once worked, one that could potentially link him to the crime? Then came a surprising break in the case. A forensic team examining Emily's clothing found something strange embedded in the fibers of her jeans and socks, tiny granules of soil and algae fragments consistent with the lake bed where Lacey had been found. It was clear now that Emily had also been drowned in that same lake and only later transported to the garage. Investigators determined that her body had been moved several days after her death. This meant someone had access to a vehicle, the physical strength to move a dead body, and intimate knowledge of the Griggs property. That revelation shifted the investigation yet again. If Daniel had help, who could it have been? The answer would arrive in an unexpected form, caught on camera, cloaked in darkness, and leading detectives down a chilling new path. Just as investigators were preparing to arrest Daniel Pike for the murders of Emily Cordero and Lacey Brent, an unexpected piece of evidence emerged that would change everything. A neighbor who lived directly across from the late Harold Griggs' home came forward with footage from their doorbell camera. The video, time-stamped 4 days after Emily's disappearance, showed a hooded figure entering the garage well past midnight. The person stayed inside for approximately 20 minutes, then re-emerged dragging a large empty tarp and placing it in the trunk of a dark sedan parked at the curb. The figure's identity was obscured, but there were noticeable clues. The build was slender and tall, the movements deliberate and cautious. When the video was enhanced, a few seconds of partial facial recognition revealed something shocking. The intruder wasn't Daniel Pike. It was a woman. The police used facial recognition technology to try and match the figure, and soon a name surfaced: Ava Griggs, the estranged daughter of Harold Griggs. Ava had lived out of state for several years, reportedly having a strained relationship with her father. She hadn't attended his funeral, and most neighbors assumed she had cut ties completely. But police records showed that Ava had returned to Brookside Hollow 2 days before the body was discovered, supposedly to deal with the estate quietly and without fanfare. Now it appeared she had done far more than sort through old furniture. Investigators tracked Ava to a rental apartment 2 cities over. When confronted, she didn't deny being in the garage, but insisted she hadn't killed Emily. Her story was murky. She admitted to being romantically involved with Daniel Pike for nearly a year. They had met while she was visiting her father during a home renovation project. Daniel had been part of the crew. The affair had been secret, she claimed, but recently, things had spiraled out of control. According to Ava, Daniel had confessed to accidentally killing Emily in a moment of panic after she threatened to reveal everything. He begged Ava to help hide the body, warning that if she refused, she could become his next victim. Ava said she reluctantly agreed, moving Emily's body from the lake to her father's garage, while Daniel disposed of any incriminating evidence. She insisted she had no part in the murder, only in the cover-up. But forensic analysis told a different story. The cords and duct tape used to bind Emily matched a roll found in Ava's personal storage unit. Additionally, Ava's fingerprints were found on the plastic wrap encasing Emily's body. Her claims of acting under duress didn't hold up under closer examination. Daniel was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder, and Ava was charged with tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, and being an accessory to murder. During the trial, it became clear that Ava and Daniel had plotted together to silence Emily, fearing she would expose both their affair and Daniel's involvement in Lacey Brent's death. The jury returned a swift, guilty verdict. Daniel received a life sentence without parole. Ava was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The case left Brookside Hollow shaken. For months after the verdict, the house on Maplewood Lane remained empty, the garage sealed off, untouched since the discovery. It served as a grim reminder that secrets, no matter how carefully buried, always find their way to the surface.